There we are. Hey, I'm Grant. I'm a bird nerd. This is the Bird Emergency, the show where I try and find good news to talk about the environment, conservation, birds, research, you name it. It all sort of fits into this broad envelope. And I'm not sure we've got good news today, but we do have activism. And as you know, I'm increasingly getting into activism. Welcome, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter X, Twitch, and YouTube to the show. I'd like to bring in my guest for today. Not quite a frequent flyer yet on the Bird Emergency, but I think we can. You've only got to get one more appearance to become a friend of the show. I've said 3 appearances and you can be officially friend of the show. Gregory Andrews, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you, Grant? I have to try and get a third invitation, so I'll have to behave myself today.
No, well, you don't have to behave yourself. The rules are you don't have to behave yourself.
Yeah.
By way of introduction, Gregory's been on the show before to talk about a couple of things. One was his stint as the inaugural Threatened Species Commissioner, which gives him an insight into policy. And we actually didn't talk about too much about the steps that led you into getting into politics. We sort of talked about your work in government, but we didn't really talk about the early days. So maybe one day we can backtrack into that. Gregory has a perspective that is different to mine. Gregory's an Indigenous man. I want to ask you, before we talk a bit about activism and policy, how does a perspective in 2024 as an Indigenous Australian really colour and inform your attitude to activism? Do you think it's vastly different to what my standpoint might be?
I think that's a really good question. And I think in a nutshell, no, it's not. And it shouldn't be. But I think the first thing to say is something's happened in Australia, which is really positive, particularly after the apology, I think, where Australians don't feel threatened by Indigenous Australia anymore and really embrace it. And we all own it, and I'm Indigenous Australian, but I'm also Scottish and Persian Australian. And so I feel like something really positive about Australia is that Australia's really embraced Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Australia. So as an Aboriginal Australian, I feel furious about what's happening to our environment and our climate. And so on the one hand, it's really activating me to be much more proactive and active on climate activism and biodiversity conservation. But to get back to your question, I think the best way to answer it is my son, so my dreaming is a lyrebird dreaming. That's what I've got on my shirt there. So my kids have the lyrebird dreaming, which they inherited. But my son was born in Alice Springs, which is Yeperenia country, the processionary caterpillar. So I always tell him he's also a Yeperenia baby because the dreaming doesn't care about the colour of your skin. And so we all belong on this country and this continent, and we've all got a responsibility to look after it. But also 7,000 years ago, which isn't that long, we were all Indigenous because 7,000 years ago, humans hadn't developed agriculture, let alone urbanisation. So our evolutionary programming goes back tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of years. So looking after the environment and being connected to nature and country, it's in all of our DNA, regardless of whether we have First Nations ancestry or not.
Now, I'm sitting, and I generally produce this show from Wurundjeri country, and I always point out, Gregory, that it is unceded Wurundjeri country. I think I think I'll take issue a little bit with one thing you said at the start, and that that you don't think that non-Indigenous Australians are threatened anymore by Indigenous Australians. And I think that's true as long as we never use the term reparations. The minute the term reparations comes into the discussion, uh, I think
Mm.
I think that becomes terrifying, and I I kind of don't understand why that is. But that's a little bit
Mm.
off the topic of where I wanted to really go today. But I think we need
Yeah,
to raise. I think we do need to always bring up things for people to think about that might be a bit thorny and a bit
yeah. Actually, I
a,
agree with you on that. And because to be frank, um, the voice was voted down based on fear as well.
yeah,
So
and
but maybe
and the
I should
whole
have said
anti-Mabo
things are a lot better.
campaign.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, I mean, it's better than the Mabo days
Mm,
because
yeah.
people are not so threatened about the practicalities of property ownership and the
Mm,
ability to
mm,
still exploit the country.
yeah,
But
yeah.
we're well, my view is we've still got a long way to go. But one of the common threads that you just talked about all we all live here and we all have a responsibility for preserving um, the natural environment. And in a way,
Mm,
just if we want to make it livable for ourselves, that's one thing. Um, oh wow! Hey, geez, the numbers are going crazy on Twitter. Gee,
are they?
welcome,
Oh,
welcome,
great.
welcome, welcome, welcome to everyone on Twitter and X. If you'd like to make a comment or ask a question at any time, you're more than welcome to do that. Just do that in the comments, and
Yeah,
I'll well, as long as it makes sense, we'll talk about it. Now, Gregory, I invited you back on
yeah.
because your Twitter feed and your web page, your newsletter, have been sort of publicising some of the protest actions that you've been undertaking over the last few months, and particularly in light of our nature positive solutions that are on
Yeah.
offer from the government. So um, I'll ask you to sort of briefly introduce what the protests were and why you felt motivated to do them, and then
Mm.
we'll kick on from there.
Yeah. All right. Thanks. Well, look, 2 years ago, a bit over 2 years ago, I was an ambassador for Australia in West Africa for 9 countries with a total population of 120 million people. And one of the biggest jobs I had was to promote a massive woodside energy gas and oil project in Senegal. And it used to make me feel sick, to be honest with you. And that's because the science shows, and we all know, like country tells us, and the climate and the environment tell us, there's no carbon budget left. There's no room for delay or greenwashing or warm and fuzzy words. We've got to get on with hard, fast, deep climate action if we want to have a safe future for our kids and country, and also if we want to have what's left of the Australian bush and protect it. So I quit the government 2 years ago. And I felt a little bit like a bird that had escaped a cage but didn't realise the door of the cage had been open for quite a long time and I could have flown out. Uh, but now what I do is I have a consulting company, Lyrebird Dreaming, which is a social enterprise where I focus a lot on Indigenous capability and caring for country and that sort of thing. But I mostly use it to support my climate advocacy. And yeah, I've got my blog, which I'd encourage everyone to follow. And I usually put something out on that about once or twice a week. And I'll definitely write something tomorrow for the budget, which looks like it's going to be an election budget to win an election, not to win a future for Australia and our animals and plants. But also, I think my big thing that I did last year was which I put a lot of planning into, and I'm really pleased that I did it. I did a hunger strike in front of Parliament House. So I went on an indefinite hunger strike, and I didn't eat anything, and I only drank water with a bit of salt in it. I lasted for 16 days. I started the hunger strike before the politicians arrived on a Thursday, so that when they all flew in on the Monday, I was on day 5, and I hunger strike for all of that week and all of the next week until they all flew out. And my demands were pretty simple. My demands were for the government to get real on climate action. And really, since then, I think that was a turning point for me. And yeah, I've got my blog, which I use to try and dispel myths, but also hold the government to account on the greenwashing. I don't know about you, but I was kind of hopeful when Labor won that we'd have a government. The Liberals can be pretty nasty and don't care about being nasty. They don't try to pretend they're not nasty. But Labor is supposed to be the party that cares, but they don't care about my kids, and they don't care about our future. And the fact that in my lifetime, places like this behind me in Canberra will be like Saudi Arabia if they keep going on with all of their fossil fuel subsidies. You know, they spend more on fossil fuel subsidies than they do on the Royal Australian Air Force.
I,
And then, you
I
know,
know.
last...
Sorry, just so people understand the magnitude of it,
Yeah.
they collect. We had a big battle. Remember when we had the petroleum resources rent tax? We had a big battle over it, and it was watered down. It was well, it was a Rudd suggestion, and was it Gillard who eventually got it in, wasn't it? But
Yeah. Yeah.
it was completely watered down, and it was one of the reasons that Rudd lost the leadership
It
of the
was.
Labor Party.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
he pushed for it, and it got so watered down. Anyway, we have apparently a tax which takes a percentage of the of the excess profits of the petroleum industry. Now,
Yeah.
the
But it
petroleum
doesn't really
companies.
collect anything.
No. Well, this is the point I'm getting to. The petroleum
Yeah.
companies are some of the largest entities and most profitable companies in the world. And the Australian government receives more in HEX repayments
Yeah.
from students who are attending tertiary education than it does from the petroleum resources rent tax. And the petroleum industry, and indeed the business industry generally, always like to talk about the tax they pay. And in that, they include things like the GST they pay on anything they purchase, and the excise they pay when they are fueling their trucks, and all the kind of stuff that we all pay as well. But they try and lump it into, look how we pay so much tax. But they don't pay tax on their activities, on their specifically exploitative activities.
And they don't pay any excise levy when they fuel up their trucks either, because that's
No,
an exemption.
that's right.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's one of the
That's a
things.
fossil fuel subsidy. Yeah.
That's right,
Yeah.
and that's something
Yeah.
people need to understand. I was amazed at the scope of it when I was doing accounting.
Yeah.
The people involved in primary industry and mining don't pay all those levies, or they get the excise, or they get a refund for it.
They get it all back. Yeah. And
that's
so,
right.
like in Norway, Norway's a really rich country from fossil fuels. Like Australia is really abundant with fossil fuels, but in Norway, in addition to all their normal taxes, the fossil fuel companies have to pay 78% tax on all the profits they make. And then students at primary school, high school, and university, it's free. But we do the opposite. Like my son's at ANU, it's going to cost him $56,000 for his degree. But the fossil fuel companies, not only do they not have to pay tax, but we give them $10 billion a year. Actually, the latest stats came out today from the Australia Institute, and they've gone up by 31%. Last year, the fossil fuel subsidies in Australia were $14 billion,
Yeah,
which would
yeah,
employ about an extra.
13.9. Yeah.
Yeah, it would
Yeah.
employ about 140,000 school teachers or nurses. It would build multiple world-class hospitals. There's so many things we could do with that money that would actually make Australia now and in the future a better country.
Yeah. I mean, it's.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's awkward.
the greenwashing. It I don't
The
even
green,
know if it's a strategy. I just think it's just normal. I think
I
nearly
think it
all
is.
business people and politicians fall into this.
Yeah,
That they it's like the way that in our media now, you just watch the news or watch any of these sort of Sunrise Today show or whatever. Whenever they want to talk about what the government is doing,
yeah,
they never say the government is going to employ 497 people to carry out a particular activity and this is what you'll get. They always go, the government has announced $450 million.
yeah.
Right?
Actually, I want
So,
to I want to read you a tweet and a reply that I did the other day, because Tanya Plibersek, like at the moment, they're moving into election mode. So the tweets
oh
and
yeah,
the greenwashing is just out of control. But the Minister for the Environment, she put out a tweet, and I just want to find it because I think it's just so,
it,
it's just such a classic
I think it's one
example.
I retweeted.
Here it is.
Um,
So she put out a tweet saying, making Australia a renewable energy superpower. And then there's a picture of a wind farm and it says, breaking, Labor has now ticked off enough renewable energy projects to power more than 3 million Australian homes. So I clicked on reply and I said, but Minister Tanya Plibersek, since 2022, you've also approved new coal mines with 156 million tonnes of emissions. And to put that into perspective, an average Aussie family has 15 to 20 tonnes of emissions per year. So emissions from your coal mine approvals are equal to at least 8 million families. So she's trying to say that they've actually reduced emissions by the equivalent of 3 million homes, but actually her coal mine approvals have increased them by 8 million. So it's just the greenwashing actually just drives me crazy. But I think I'm also really tuned into it because for 31 years as a public servant, I was writing all those talking points, and so I can just see it for what it is. And unfortunately, the politicians and the public servants start believing the rubbish. That's another one from the Treasurer, where the
yeah,
Treasurer
yeah,
said something about how amazing the budget was, and something great they were doing for $100 million for this, that, or the other. And I was like, well, actually, I'm not sure. It was something about the budget for the future. And I was thinking, well, actually, no, the 10 billion of fossil fuel subsidies aren't good for our future. That's burning our future. Yeah,
yeah.
so I
It's
do enjoy holding them accountable on Twitter.
um, this is a bit beyond the scope that we thought we might talk about, but um, I'm wondering now whether uh, because we're pretty much on the same wavelength. I think in that, I mean, I had a stream on election night, and I was emotional because I was feeling really positive that
Mm,
this government would actually change things and things would really happen. And now I'm
yeah,
totally deflated. Um, I've always thought that anyone who's got a conservative friend is not someone you want to be a friend with. That's always sort of been my call to arms. But now I also think, hey, anyone who's carrying an ALP membership card and tells you they're a conservationist who is not being actively disruptive within the party can fuck right off, right? I mean, they're they're lying to themselves before they're even
mm,
lying to
I
you and
think
me.
I think a lot of the politicians and the senior public servants believe their own, believe the propaganda propaganda.
They're high
And
on their
so
own supply. There's no doubt about it.
yeah, and also they think that if you explain the climate science and the irrationality of government policy, then that you're mentally deranged. And like I met a very senior public servant this week who I've known for 31 years, who works in the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade in that portfolio, and he asked me 4 times, "Are you okay?" You go, "Are you okay, Gregory?" And because
Can
I'm not towing the the line, and because
yeah,
I'm not just continuing to support the dominant paradigm, and I kept saying I am okay, and then I actually went home and I wrote him an email and said, actually, you know what, I'm not okay, none of us are, because this is what the climate science shows. Climate science shows that we're on track for 2.5 to 3 degrees of warming. But that's not just like having a jumper, the difference between wearing a jumper or taking it off. A 3-degree increase in the global climate on average means catastrophic ecosystem
oh,
failure.
if we
Or,
go to 3 degrees, if we go to 3 degrees,
yeah,
most of Australia is uninhabitable.
that's
We
right.
will not
Like,
have we will not have enough water
yeah.
to maintain the industries that we are currently
Mm, I,
defending, and
well, it'll
the
be like Saudi
world.
Arabia. Yeah,
Well,
it'll be like a desert.
it'll be worse than that, because
Yeah.
all the Saudis will not be able to exist in Saudi Arabia, so they'll be
Mm,
migrating everywhere else. So then the people who have already got the oversized armies will be we will be having invasions based on availability of water. We can forget the we can just forget what we're looking at now. And all the people in Australia who are desperately saying, no more boats, no more boats, where's your paperwork? We'll be fleeing to wherever we can get water and food. Because
mm.
it's just simple fact.
It's
It,
a scary future. It is.
it,
But getting
oh,
back to your point about,
oh yeah, get
I
back
felt a
to it.
sense of hope too. But to be honest with you, on election day, I was relieved that the Liberals had been voted out, and I was glad that we had sort of like what some people now refer to as Liberal light, like a Labor government that's like Liberal light. But what really made me excited, and what made me also feel like a scent that I'd been naive for 50 years, was successfully campaigning to get David Pocock elected, because like when the numbers came in and we realised that he'd knocked off Zed Sezelja, who was a nasty
Oh, what a
far right,
piece of shit.
yeah,
Oh,
really nasty far right, hating, like, misogynistic, homophobic, climate change denialist promoting person. Um, we were so happy to have David Pocock, but I also realised for the first time ever, somewhat naively, democracy is so much more than turning up on the day and choosing between who's offered up. Democracy is also about identifying and finding a good candidate and getting them elected. So, what's giving me hope now, why I don't feel despondent, is I'm really hoping, and I'm going to be doing everything in my power to campaign for a hung parliament with more Teals and people like David Pocock with the balance of power. Because you look at what they've already achieved without a balance of power, and because whenever it comes to something like dumping CO2 in the ocean or being really accountable, Labor and Liberal team up together, and Liberal and Labor vote to protect their duopoly. But if
yeah.
they have if we have a hung parliament and they've got to negotiate with credible independence, I think that's our only hope for a safe climate. And like in my electorate in Bean, which is the southern electorate of the ACT, we joke it's where all the bogans are, where I'm from in
Yeah,
Canberra.
Tuggeranong.
Yeah. And
Tuggers,
so
all the tuggers. Yeah,
Tuggers. Exactly.
yeah,
That's where I do my weekly shop at
yeah,
Aldi at Tuggers. But
yeah.
look, where Tuggeranong is like we're looking now. The voices have been. I'm supporting them and part of that campaign. We're looking for someone to take on David Smith, who is this nice, friendly looking, clean cut Labor bloke, but he doesn't do anything
Oh, it's
for
like
us, and
it's like
he's supporting all the
David,
fossil fuel companies.
but it's David who? You know, he's
David Smith's his name,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
And I'm like,
But
I said to him, I said,
he should be
I voted
prominent because he's in such
exactly,
a safe space. He
yeah.
should be really leading the charge, and he's not. He's a nobody.
So I think what's going to happen at this next election is just like the Liberals got lost a lot of their seats to the Teals. A lot of people have had enough, and they've realised that, like, it's not a left or a right thing. Climate action, it's a thing for humanity and for our kids and our country. And they're going to vote for people like David Pocock or Allegra Spender or Sophie Scamps, these credible independents who actually their job is not to toe the line with their party. Their job is to listen to the community and put in place the policies that the community want. And the Voices have been just did about 3 months of surveying, and the number one thing that came up that people are worried about is climate change and the lack of action
Oh,
by the current government.
yeah. Now, I mean, you've been around the machine for a long time. I want to ask you something about that just before I get back on track. But I want to ask you about that high level public servant, right? Who asked you if you were okay. Now,
Yeah.
now, do you know them well enough to know which band they are? They would be in with?
Yeah, look, I know the position and everything that
Yeah.
they're involved in, but I
Okay.
don't I
So
don't want to.
no. I don't want
Yeah,
you to identify them or anything like that. But what
yeah,
the point I want to draw out is, let's just say they're on the second or third highest band,
mm,
right? So they're not a
yeah,
department head, they're not an
yeah,
assistant, but
yeah,
maybe they're the next level.
yeah. That's a
And
fair
you
assumption. Yep.
and you got to that level, didn't you? Or were you one
Yeah,
below?
yeah, yep, yep,
Okay, so
yep,
okay, so public servants on that level are
yep.
earning somewhere around 140 to 150 grand a year.
No, nearly double
No.
that. So
Okay, all
like,
right. Well, it's
yeah,
even
so like
worse.
two
So
two hundred and
two.
like 250,000 plus superannuation.
Okay,
Yeah. Yep.
so getting up
Mm,
towards 300 with
yep.
expenses and stuff. So we're
Yep.
looking at someone who's on 300,000 a year. I
Yep.
don't care whether they identify as a lefty or not. They
Yeah.
do not. They do not have any idea what my
Yes.
neighbours living on 70,000 a year,
Yeah.
or my neighbours on the other side who
Mm,
are pensioners and disability pensioners.
yeah.
They have no fucking
I,
idea what their
I
life
I
is.
would just I don't want to sound like I'm defending them, but they might. So I know where you're coming from, but I'll give you an example because I ended up on a salary like that. I was on a salary of about $250,000, with superannuation and everything. But I lived in a caravan at one stage of my life because my mum and my sister and I were homeless. And then when I finished school, I worked in an abattoir, and I worked in an
I worked in
abattoir.
an abattoir too. I
Yeah,
know,
yeah, I'm really proud
and
of that. It was a chicken abattoir, and I did say to them, I don't want to work anywhere where I hear any clucking or see feathers or guts. And so I
well,
worked in the areas where, like, you'd cut the chicken meat off, or where you would
yeah,
put
yeah, yeah,
chickens in
yeah.
plastic bags. But I think my point is like, I there are people in the public service or in business who could earn that much money, but who do come from a background where they can
Yeah.
understand. But your
Yeah,
point is
I'm gonna qualify that even more though,
yeah,
Gregor. I'm gonna qualify
yeah,
that even more. It's
yeah.
so much harder. It's so much harder now for people who
Mm.
are average wage earners than it
Oh,
was 10,
totally.
10 years ago or
Because
15
when
years
I
ago.
went to uni,
So
because thanks to Gough Whitlam, my university was free, like people in Norway. Like, if
well,
you want to be a nurse or a teacher or a doctor, you can go to uni for free because the fossil fuel companies have to pay the tax, not the
but
students.
don't
But
you have a hex debt?
I didn't
I
have
mean,
a hex. I
I'm
must
older
be
than
older than
you,
you.
and no, I'm
I,
older than you.
I'm, I think I
I'm
paid
only a
hex.
couple of years from 60. I'm only a couple of years
Oh,
from
I'm 50
60.
because I'm 56, and I think I paid hex
Okay,
in
no,
my last
I'm older
year.
than you. I'm
Yeah, so
older
I
than
paid a
you,
bit of
but
hex. But
I've gone back and done
yeah,
extra study. But yeah, I've got a
yeah.
bit of a bitch
But
of a hex
no,
debt,
so
no
look,
doubt.
my main thing that I think is quite funny is the person who was asking me this. They weren't trying to be offensive. They genuine and like I'm the first to
I
admit,
know
yes,
they don't even know how
I've had
removed they
depression.
are.
Yeah, yeah, I'm the first to say yes. I've had depression and climate and ecological grief, and I deal with it. And sometimes I get waves of it because actually we're losing what it means to be Australian. But this person genuinely thought I was mentally
Yeah.
deranged, and because I was concerned about climate science, because they've just talked themselves into believing all of the rubbish talking points that everything's okay, and that making an announcement and putting out a tweet with a picture of a wind turbine and some statistics means that everything's going to be fine. So there is a huge problem with cognitive dissonance. A huge problem with cognitive dissonance, I think.
Oh, it's horrific, isn't it? Like that
Yeah,
they and I mean this opens up another thing
I
to
I do
uh,
I do think we have to try and be positive, which is why I'm
yeah,
always
but
grateful for people like David Pocock. And he went up the Gouldian Finch. That was quite devastating over a year ago, and then that ripped open the wound a few weeks ago when the government, Tanya Plibersek, allowed the bulldozers to start destroying the Gouldian Finch habitat for an AUKUS, like a defence housing estate. As part of the whole defence business with AUKUS and all of that in the Northern Territory. Um, but David Pocock went up there, and so did Lydia Thorpe. And I respect her for that, and him. Both of them realise it's not their electorate; they're senators from southeastern Australia, but they know that we can't just keep destroying nature because we're destroying what it means to be Australian. And so I think we've got to get more people like that elected. There are things with Lydia Thorpe that I don't agree with. I think her approach is probably a little bit more radical than my personal approach, but I admire her for going up there and saying and meeting the community and supporting the traditional owners with David Pocock to try and stop those bulldozers destroying that endangered finch habitat.
well, I don't know if you were following, but I spent 3 days in the encampment
I
there,
I did. I saw that.
and
Yeah.
I mean I saw Gouldian finches there,
Yeah.
and I saw one of the posts on Twitter, and by the way, that's the Twitter feed for Gregory at
Yeah.
Lyrebird Dream. Okay,
Yeah.
so that's why that's up
That's
there.
my
So
for all my socials. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So
Mm.
uh, so I'll just pop that out for a minute. Yeah, and I saw this tweet which got a lot of attention on Twitter that had the birds that were
Mm.
present at Lee Point, and then I went and
Oh
checked,
yeah.
and that
I
but then
saw
I
that
went
one.
and
I
checked.
think it was Nick Volk who put it out,
Yeah, I think
maybe.
so.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and then I went and checked the conservation status, the
Yeah.
IUCN status of all
Mm.
those birds, and none of them were critically endangered. Some were near threatened,
Mm.
and and it just got me thinking a bit about how, in a way,
Yeah.
our federation is actually one of the limiting factors in conservation work, because all these birds are assessed, or all these animals are assessed
Mm.
on a state and territory basis, as well as
Mm.
a national basis, and
Yeah.
then you have the overarching international
Global.
basis.
Yeah, that's
So,
right. Yeah. Yeah.
so, so you can have a population that's threatened, and if it's
Mm.
a race or a subspecies, it
Yeah.
often doesn't get treated the same way that that any animal that hasn't differentiated itself
Yeah, that's
like
right.
that.
A- And
And,
also,
and
our laws don't really help the animals or plants until they're already endangered,
which
which is then it's too late.
which is which is one of the issues I wanted to ask you about with
Yeah. Yeah.
um about uh, I wanted to get your thought about how effective. I mean,
Mm.
let's start with a few assumptions that we can agree on.
Yeah.
It's really urgent.
Yeah.
Um, Climate change and biodiversity preservation are different problems. Can we agree on that?
They're different, but they overlap.
Yeah, but they're
Yeah,
different problems. You cannot as a government
yeah,
wave around things that you're doing to reduce global warming and pretend that that's going to attend to the biodiversity loss that that we're
yeah.
having.
Like,
Yeah,
actually, we
so
need climate action to avoid biodiversity degradation, but by itself, it's not enough
that's right.
because
And
you
and
could
there
have
and
climate
there are
action,
things.
yeah, and
Sorry,
habitat degradation, yeah,
but there's things we
yeah,
have to do to, like, if you're stupid enough as a minister to come out and say no more extinctions,
mm,
and then you do not mitigate biodiversity loss. See, biodiversity preservation in itself may not have any effect on climate
mm,
change. There are some
yeah.
actions that need to be taken that are not climate actions. We need to do them both, and they're both
Yeah.
urgent in this country, right?
Do you know
So
what's
can we?
really tricky though, Grant, about the no extinctions? Because see, I worked in that area as a threatened species commissioner, and I know what that was about. And the public servants, senior public servants, and the advisors would have said to the minister, "Oh yeah, that's that." Initially, they would have tried to talk her out of it because they would have been worried it would be an extra cost burden because they'd have to find money to save
Yeah,
species.
to
And they'd
save
also
species. That's
have
right.
to tell coal mines or Coles car parks that you
Yeah, you'd
can't
have
do
to
that.
say no. Yeah,
Yeah, but actually, what the wording, that it's all about the wording. So they didn't say no more extinctions in the wild. They said no more
no, no,
extinction.
no. That's
As long
that's
as they
another
have,
part of
as long as there's a
an
couple of
insurance
orange-bellied
policy. That's
parrots,
right.
yeah, as long as there's
That's right.
two orange-bellied parrots at Melbourne Zoo, then they haven't gone extinct. And
Yeah.
so that one of the but this what this really is a worry is people think no more extinctions. Oh great, that means biodiversity's okay. But you can actually have no extinctions and horrific biodiversity depletion. Like look
Yeah.
at
Just have
tigers.
more
Tigers
zoos.
tigers are
Yeah.
pretty much extinct in the wild because there's many more tigers in zoos. They're not going to go extinct. They're bred and they have all these programs to maintain their diversity. But the habitat that they used to live in is pretty much all gone. So it's a very sneaky announcement, the no more extinctions announcement, because it makes them look good, but they can keep destroying habitat
And
and have no
but but
extinctions. They
it
can
but it also it
yeah.
also raises a problem that they're not prepared to deal with. But it's like what I
Mm,
said about how species are evaluated.
yeah.
Tigers. When we say tigers, I think there's 7 species of tigers.
Yeah, there
Right.
are. There's all
So
different Sumatran tigers and
yeah,
Himalayan
and
tigers,
and
and yeah,
and I think it was just the Javan, with one that was assumed extinct, has just been seen
yeah,
in the
yeah,
wild again.
yeah,
But they're functionally extinct because they're
yeah.
not
And
replacing their population, and
and
the gene
they're
pool
only
is
counting the
decreasing.
extinctions of things that they're monitoring. Like the Great
Yeah,
Barrier Reef, 80% of it just got cooked. Some of it will
yeah,
recover, some of it won't. But there'll be species on the reef that have become extinct from this latest bleaching that we never knew existed because they haven't been identified and they haven't had all their taxonomy identified. But meanwhile, down in Tasmania, they're catching these really cute little handfish and they're putting them in, they're catching them and they're keeping them in in tanks to stop them going extinct. And then they can get good PR from that, and that Minister Plibersek can put out a tweet with a picture of a cute handfish and saying we're saving the handfish from going extinct. But meanwhile, we're actually our emissions from coal exports are bigger than the entire emissions of Germany's economy, and that's a major driver of destruction of the reef. And that bloke you've just put up is one of the persistent people that keep calling out all this greenwashing, Terry Hughes.
yeah. So
We need more
on
people like him.
on Twitter, if you want to see some firebrand posting about biodiversity and particularly the barrier reef,
Yeah,
I recommend that you follow at Prof Terry Hughes, TERRY, Hughes, and he's on the screen
Yeah.
now, and uh, I've got massive respect for Terry Hughes because when they got sold down the river, all the conservation groups got sold down the river with the Great Barrier Reef Foundation and their eye-wateringly large grant from the federal government when they
Mm.
didn't even maintain an office, but people like Prof Hughes didn't get none of the bodies he was associated with, having studied the reef for 40 years, they got nothing, and some pretend foundation got all the money for Great Barrier Reef um, conservation. It just, I mean, that was an exercise in classical greenwashing that the last government
Mm.
did.
We,
Uh,
actually, in Aboriginal cultures, we also call that payback. So, like basically, he doesn't get any funding or support because he's critical. So the payback that he gets for that is um, no funding. Um, hey, can I just say, before I forget, this is totally changing the subject, so we can go back. But last week I saw three blue-faced honey eaters in Canberra, and I reported them on eBird. And it's the first time eBird have ever said to me, "Gregory, did
are
you
you
really see
sure?
that?"
Yeah,
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 I
that's
did,
right.
and because
Yeah,
I
yeah, no,
know,
no, that's what I mean. That's what eBird say to you. They go,
I
"Are you
know,
sure there hasn't been
yeah,
a
yeah.
record for that bird
And
in your
And then
location? Are
I
you
was like,
sure you?"
yes. And the
Yeah,
reason I reported them is
yeah,
because I saw them. But
yeah,
actually, because they're totally out of range here. But I know what
yeah,
they look like because I lived in Darwin and in
yeah,
Kakadu,
yeah.
and but I think that's quite interesting. But I also think it probably shows what like people like Professor Stephen Garneau would say, which is that the the birds are actually have one advantage for adaptation. They're more mobile than plants or
Yeah, yeah,
mammals.
yeah.
And so I think that they were probably responding to the extra water that we've had down here and, more pollination and that sort of thing.
Oh,
So I saw them.
it could be too the fact
Yeah.
that the blooming periods for their main
Yes.
food trees are
Have
changing,
changed.
or
Yeah,
or it
that's right.
or it may
That,
be
yeah.
perhaps they're less aggressive than for instance the noisy miners, and
Well,
it might be
they
that
were
noisy
getting
miners are
harassed.
pushing them out from other
Yeah,
places.
and they were in a tree and they were getting harassed by noisy miners.
Yeah, yeah,
And then so I wanted to share that with all the bird nerds. And then the
yeah.
other thing that I've seen three times in the last week is superb parrots down by Lake Tuggeranong. Like down in
Oh,
Tuggeranong, there's one of those artificial lakes with a cycle track around
yep,
it,
yep, yep.
and we can get on to the reason why I've been cycling around that too later on. But I've been training cycling around that, and I keep seeing superb parrots. And then finally, I haven't seen them, but a lot of bird nerds in Canberra have seen a few swifties too
Well,
in the
that's
last few weeks.
that's kind of encouraging.
Yeah.
Um, here's the thing when we talk about swift parrots, and for non Australians, if you're watching, there's three migratory parrots in the world, apparently. Uh, I think they're, depending on how you define a migrant, there might be a few more altitudinal migrants and whatnot. But two of those parrots are in Australia, the orange bellied parrot and the swift parrot. Both are endangered, critically endangered. There's
Mm.
a captive breeding program and release into the wild program for the orange bellied parrot, but not for the swift parrot. The swift parrot
Mm.
is in far more peril, but the swift parrot is a blossom feeder and it functionally behaves like a lorikeet. And you'll often see it in mixed flocks with rainbow
Mm.
lorikeets. But it breeds in hollows in Tasmania and then comes in the cooler time of the year up to the mainland, and it follows the blossoms, and
Yeah.
you'll see, and we'll see it moving through Melbourne, and then goes used to be the ironbark woodlands and the box woodlands in central New South Wales, but it had had been recorded in Canberra
Mm,
frequently in like the last 100 or so years. But
yeah,
now the population estimate for those birds means that a lot of people think it's functionally extinct now, and that
yeah. I think
there's
it's
not a
down to 500.
that's
And
right.
I
So
remember 10 years ago when I was the Threatened Species Commissioner, there were about 3,000 of them.
that's right.
So
It's
its
been so rapid,
population,
and that's because there's nowhere
yeah,
for them to breed. I
its
mean,
population has completely plummeted. And in addition to, yeah, there's nowhere for them to breed because the Tasmanian Logging Corporation keeps chopping down all of their nest hollow trees. And that runs at a loss too, like an economic loss. So the Tasmanian taxpayers pay for that. And then in addition, it's losing all of its habitat on the mainland from historical and ongoing land clearing. The orange bellied parrot, it is a grain. It eats grass seeds, but does the same thing. Comes to the mainland for winter. The interesting thing about it is, I remember working out that its global biomass. If you weighed every orange bellied parrot on the planet, it was equivalent to 2 3 litre milk bottles, because they only weigh
jeez,
about 40 or 50 grams, and the total weight of them is less than 2 bottles of milk, 2 family bottles of milk from what
jeez.
Coles or Woolies or Aldi. Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm just getting the Swift Parrot eBird up
Yeah.
so we
So
can
anyway,
have a
I think eBird have accepted my blueface honey eater. Yeah, I've actually seen the swift parrot at Wombat Ridge at our conservation property. Um, but I haven't seen them for quite a few years, to be honest.
so just showing
Yeah,
uh,
the range.
broadly the range
Yeah.
uh,
Mm.
there. So, but if I come out of there, come on, come out of there. Yeah, there's. I'm just looking for oh, it's not going to give me a population estimate. I'll need to go to
What?
IC.
Hey Grant, what's the name
Yep.
of that Twitter feed for? I think his name is Dejan or Dejan Stevanovic. He's a Swift.
Doctor Swift Parrot.
Yeah, that's
Doctor
a
Swift
good
Parrot.
Twitter feed for
Yeah.
people to follow too,
Yeah.
if they're interested. Yeah,
And and I would also say Difficult Birds Group, ANU,
yeah,
um, Cat Young. There's a whole cohort that are really good to follow
yeah, yeah.
for rare birds. Now let
Hmm.
me try and get back onto track.
So where were we? That was a bit of a diversion, but I wanted to tell you about the blue-faced honey eaters because I agreed. I think the reason they're here and they're way out of range is that maybe this will become a future range for them as they're forced out of other places, or as climate variability reduces the availability of food for them elsewhere. And
And
then
for people who think that's good, they need to think about, okay, blueface honeyeaters are big, gregarious. They live in groups. They
mm,
behave
mm,
like wattle birds and also
yeah,
like some of the frybirds, but they behave a lot more like, say, the red and little wattle birds.
yeah,
Now, now let's just say the blueface honeyeater starts to turn up in significant numbers in Canberra. What does that mean for the small honeyeaters? That means trouble.
yeah.
So
It means
people,
trouble for eastern spinebills and all
yep,
that sort of thing.
yep,
Definitely.
white-naped
Mm,
honeyeaters, brown-headed honeyeaters,
yeah,
all those kind of birds. So this is where people need to um, often, list makers, tickers, bird watchers will often think, oh, that's good. I'll be able to see such and such here and there. But it just means something else is going to be displaced. So we
yeah.
need
It's a
to,
sign that there's a disruption occurring in the ecology.
yeah,
Mm,
that's exactly right. And it might be just a one season kind of thing, but
yeah,
and it might be a reaction to drought, but it might be a reaction to increased uh, frequency and severity of bushfires. It might be the urban sprawl in regional areas as towns become bigger, and
Yeah.
the vegetation that is on the fringes of towns that is like a green belt surprise surrounding towns before you get to the farmland. That's disappearing. So there's so many influences that it might be that are causing these movements, that are that they're really important for biodiversity preservation, but they're not climate. They're not directly related to the most impactful things we could do for climate mitigation. So that's really why I always try really hard to pull them apart, because the government is trying as hard as it can to pull them together. They're trying to say, look at the good things we're doing, and they're trying to mesh them into two into one, so then they can say, yes, we've got the EPA, we're really doing something, but that's at the moment functionally useless because it's got the same regulatory framework that the minister was saying was broken.
Yeah, and actually the EPA doesn't exist yet. They've got to pass legislation for it.
Yeah.
And the proposed legislation, like I think what you're alluding to, is the minister has something called call-in powers, which means even though it's independent, any decision that the minister doesn't like, the minister can overturn it. So it's not really independent. It's actually dependent on the minister.
Did you see?
And so it may not get approved. Like the Greens probably won't support it. And then the Teals may or may not support that. They might support it as a first step, or they might all think, let's wait and have an election. And then when we've got more power, with the balance of power, we can force them to do some of these things.
But here's the danger, and I mean, you'll tell me you've been in this world, but here's the danger as I see it. Let's just say that the coalition can see the writing on the wall that, hey, wow, there might be another 5 or 10 or 12 or 15 Teal, Independents or Greens elected. So why don't we get together with Liberal Light, the Labor Party, and why don't we pass this stuff so that when we win the next election, we have the ministerial oversight. We can say, no bullshit. So they might be saying, hey, instead of having this wild, loony, greeny, lefty fairies at the bottom of the garden balance of power, these are all the terms that were always thrown up about independence and the Democrats and all the Bob Catter. Everyone thinks he's a loony. I kind of agree, but these are the people who you will have to deal with if we don't get together. So how about we get together? Tanya, send us over the draft legislation. We'll put a few lines in the stuff we don't like. We'll put in one or two bits that will give you a shit sandwich to eat, and you can munch on that, but still say, look what we've done. And it'll be disastrous. And it bypasses a crossbench. And I think that's a real danger. What do you think?
I don't think that will happen for that because just like Labor doesn't look like it's teaming up with the Greens, the Liberals will do everything they can before an election to avoid looking like they're supporting Labor because they'll want to wedge Labor. However, they will and they always do it on anything that's a threat to the duopoly, the two-party duopoly. Like with election fundraising, on anything to do with election fundraising, transparency, like there's no code of conduct for politicians. There is for public servants, but not for politicians.
And that's right. Truth in advertising for everyone except politicians.
But they always team up on all of that stuff. But I don't think they would team up on the environment. My gut instinct is they wouldn't, because it would be a net political negative for them. It would lose them more votes than it got them, and they don't think they need the environment to stay in power. Yeah, no, and because they're interested
But
in
they're
power.
able to
Yeah,
turn but they're able to turn around and say, look, we need to make sure that the loony greens do not have control of this policy going forward. It's such an important area, and they're able to embrace a bit of the greenwashing while retaining that ministerial power, which means
yeah.
every
But
minister
see,
can say no.
yeah, no, I don't think that would happen because also Labor, although Labor hates the Greens, they don't publicly call the Greens loony because they need them. They need them for anything progressive, but they just don't like the Greens because the Greens are too progressive for them. But I think probably what will happen is that legislation will be put in the can until after the election. That's what they
Which,
usually do. They kick
which
stuff like that down the
yeah,
down the
yeah,
road
which
if
means
they
it'll
think they're
never
going to
happen.
lose. Yeah, that's right. So I don't think we'll have an EPA before the next election because I think that they'll probably, unless they can get the Greens or the Teals to support them, unless they have an EPA that's a good one, where the Greens and the Teals support it, they'll just kick it down. They'll have a parliamentary committee and announce various committees and inquiries, and then they can say that they've started the process, but they won't actually do anything.
Can
And
you
because then they can keep approving coal mines and gas projects, and because both of the major parties are totally addicted to fossil fuels.
can you see the um no, actually no, we'll get there afterwards. Forget that. Um have you been meeting, apart from trying to get some influence on pollies and like David Pocock particularly and some of the Teals, have you been meeting with NGOs and other activists to try and, you know, formulate some policy, some way forward, some methodology that you think might be more effective than where
I
we're at
tend,
now?
I really think it's important to talk to anyone. And for example, during my hunger strike, a couple of the Liberal people, even some of them snuck down and to say hello to me. So I'm sort of a bit, I'm of the belief that I kind of try and keep my doors open to everyone. Um, and and often the people, which is like, um, so yes, the answer is yes. Like I'll always like connect with, particularly with really good NGOs that do great work, like Australian Wildlife Conservancy and Bush Heritage. But also, like last year, I spoke at the Carbon Markets Institute, and this year there's a big conference in Sydney coming up on nature and the environment, and I've been invited to that. So I definitely use all of those opportunities. Um, but I also think like the real people we need to talk to are the everyday Australians, which is why I've got this idea that I thought I would test with you and with people who are watching or listening to the show, which I haven't fully decided, but I'm 99% there. But for my action this year, for my climate advocacy, I did the hunger strike last year. But this year, I'm thinking that as a kid who grew up in the bush but now lives in Canberra, and as a former ambassador and threatened species commissioner, I really care a lot about climate. And it really worries me that politicians are trying to divide us and the fossil fuel industry is trying to confuse everyone at a time when we've got to be united. And so I want to ride my e-bike across Australia from Cottesloe Beach in WA to Bondi Beach solo and
No,
without
no,
any,
no.
and just with
Can I
my
come
electric
with you?
toothbrush and my credit card and stay in motels and hotels and stop at cafes and recharge my battery like at when I'm having a coffee or with some grey nomads off the back of their camper trailer and have conversations about the importance and the simplicity and the benefits of rolling out renewable energy as soon as possible. What do you
All
think
right,
of that
Gregory.
idea?
All right, I'm gonna broaden the scope a little bit because I've been
Yeah,
talking about for about 4 years of just taking the bird emergency on a journey.
yeah,
My initial plan was, again, I've built uh,
mm,
I've built a mobile setup so that I
yeah,
can
yeah.
go.
Which you
So
took
that
up to Darwin and everything for
well,
that.
I didn't I actually didn't really because we didn't have the space.
Okay, yeah,
That was someone else's project, right? So,
yeah.
but I've
I'm
always
just trying to
wanted.
stop the sun coming in.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. You're right
Yeah.
there now. It might be glaring off the
I'm
screen,
like, hang on, I was
but it's
like
fine.
Jesus then. Hang on.
Yeah. Get the halo effect.
Yeah.
There we are. Yeah, there we go. Well, there we go. That's for our Catholic
Yeah.
and Orthodox viewers.
So
Now, I think that's a great idea. I would like
great.
to. I just need to get my an e-bike, and I
Yeah.
would come with you. Um,
Yeah.
I'd like to be a bit more radical.
I I
I'd like us to take swags,
I
and
I I want to do it like where I stay in a fairly not an upmarket motel, but I have a nice bed, and occasionally, like if I'm at Narandra or Oyen or something, I can get the honeymoon suite where there's a jacuzzi, so I can
oh,
soak my legs. Like not just every now and again,
yeah.
once a week, like.
Oh
But
yeah, yeah. Once a week, you
yeah,
can have
yeah,
it. Yeah,
and ride about 100 kilometers a day. But
yeah, yeah.
I
That's
also really like the idea of doing a daily e-bird. So like, because
yes,
if I do
yes. All
100
right. Well,
kilometers a
let's.
day,
All right. Let's
I
do
can
it.
do an e-bird when I have my coffee in the morning, and then I can do an e-bird at lunchtime, and I can
Yeah,
leave a
and
trail of e-birds
and
across Australia.
at every significant spot that we know we're going to,
Yeah,
that's how I would like to do it. And
I
then you go to schools on the
I
way. You do a community address everywhere,
yeah. I
and
think what
yeah.
I could do is I could meet you for part of it, for the Victoria part. You could
I
meet
know.
me at the border, or
I know.
you
If it's to be effective, I'd
you
do the
want to
whole
do the
thing, and
whole
then
thing.
yeah, I just need to work out how to fund it. But depending on when you want to
Yeah,
do it, I think there's
yeah. I
I think there's
I
a
want to
real
do it this
opportunity to
winter.
do it
Yeah, I think it's so
this winter,
important. Like
as in next month.
in a couple of months, yeah. And because
Oh gee,
if you think about it, the Great Barrier Reach is bleached, the worst bleaching ever. Southwestern Australia's forests are literally carking it. There's an
yeah. Well,
official term for it in
that's right.
ecology, but they've
Yeah,
basically carked it from heat and drought. But
yeah.
it's like
Water
irreversible
stress.
carking.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
That's
it's
right.
not just
It's
a
water
few
stress.
trees dying; it's like
Yeah,
collapse of the forest.
yeah, yeah.
We've just got these horrific heat waves in Southeast and South Asia where like all the schools in the Philippines and in Bangladesh have closed and
Oh,
um,
mate,
like record
I've got lots of friends in
temperatures.
the Philippines, and I can tell
Mm,
you that
yeah,
most of my friends in the Philippines are people who are average people. They do not have
yeah,
air conditioning, and next
mm,
month in Davao, they are
mm,
tipped to get to 52 degrees.
yeah, yeah.
That's going to be people just dropping dead.
It is. That's going to create what they call wet bulb moments, where you get the
That's right.
combination of humidity and heat, and the human body just can't metabolize, and people will drop dead.
Yep,
Um,
and that
so
and
I want,
this will become the norm in
I really
northern
want to do
Australia
this
too.
bike ride, like probably in July, August, and I
Okay.
want to do about 100 kilometers a day.
Yeah.
Stop, like you
That's
said, and do community meetings, local radio, and also I thought if I could fundraise $100 per kilometer, that would be enough to fund 45 large renewable energy solar systems for like CWAs, Indigenous Community Health Services, men's sheds,
yep.
RFAs, right, rural
Uh,
fire services. And
yep.
so I could actually help communities with energy security and deal with energy poverty on the way.
All right.
Yeah,
Well, let's workshop that. If I can
righto.
get my hands on a bike, I'm coming. So I'm going to be reaching out
Okay.
for a
I that
sponsor. for
That's
a
why I've
bike
been riding around Lake Tuggeranong, because it's 7
training.
kilometres. And so I've been doing laps, and I ride down to Namadgi National Park, and then on the way back, to get up my miles, I'll just do 3 or 4 laps around the lake, because I'm trying to ride 50 kilometres a day as training, because I'll have to do 100 kilometres a day on average once I
Yeah, yeah,
start
and
my.
that
I'm calling it the hashtag e-bike for Australia. Like,
well,
because I thought that's a good title, because I want it to be, I want to make climate change not something that's seen as lefty or greeny, but for all of us. Like, we've
it's
just got to deal with it, get on with it.
it's existential, and
Yeah,
that's the
that's
thing
right.
that the
Mm.
thing that freaks me out is how easily, um, uh, I mean the future gas strategy,
Mm.
how uncritically that
Oh,
that was dealt with
yeah.
in the mainstream media. But if you look at anyone who's got any kind of expertise in
Mm.
climate,
Yeah.
biodiversity, even people who are specialists in water and irrigation,
Yeah. Yeah.
anyone who's just outside of the most mainstream of the journalists
Mm.
and the PR
Yeah.
organisations around them, everyone else has said this is bonkers. It was
Yeah.
bonkers when the coalition proposed it,
Totally.
and you've just put it in the bowl and added a few hundreds and thousands
Even
and
even if you
put it out and
ask
said here's a new
ChatGPT,
cake.
exactly. Even if you just asked ChatGPT, if you pasted it into ChatGPT and said, "What do you think of this?" then it would tell you it was bonkers.
Yeah.
But
Um,
yeah,
I don't.
so I think my climate advocacy for this year, like I personally don't think the hunger strike was negative. I think that was really powerful and positive, and it was a like, it wasn't like blocking a road. I wasn't annoying or inconveniencing anyone except myself. But some people think that it was negative. But so this year, my big initiative, it'll take me about 7 or 8 weeks, because it's 4,500 kilometres. But I want to cycle across Australia for climate action, to promote the simplicity, the importance, and the benefits of shifting to renewable energy. And while I do it, I can do eBird reports every day, multiple ones.
Well, mate, if I can get someone uh, uh, to loan me
You're
or
tempted,
sponsor.
aren't you? Yeah.
Well, oh no, I'll definitely come with you because I think uh, I'll tell you why, and
Mm.
you were leading to somewhere too.
Yeah.
You were leading to a point that I didn't say to you I wanted to discuss, but this is something I'm
Mm.
talking to people about more and more. Now, you just made the point that you didn't inconvenience anyone and all that
Yeah.
kind of stuff.
Mm.
Now, excuse me while I get a bit fruity. Who
Yeah.
fucking cares, right?
Mm.
Because let's look at the protests that have worked. The
Yeah.
dams, no dams in
Yeah.
Tasmania.
Yeah.
Hundreds of people were
Mm.
were were arrested. They were inconveniencing people. There was some violence, right?
Yeah.
Most
Yeah.
of it instigated by the police, but they were effective.
Yeah.
The moratoriums for the Vietnam War
Yeah.
inconvenienced people. They were absolutely not popular when they were
Yeah.
happening. They were the
Yeah.
long-haired, weirdo, hippie, greeny fringos.
Mm.
That worked.
Yeah.
Draft dodgers who didn't want to get involved in the Korean Wars and
Yeah.
protests, and those went on for years. They were maligned as communist malingerers,
Mm.
right? I don't give a fuck if Extinction Rebellion are upsetting people in the streets of
Mm.
Melbourne or Sydney
Yeah.
because they're getting notice, and
Yeah.
most people what in Germany when the
Mm.
Nazis were taken over, and remember Hitler won an
Yeah.
election to take over the parliament and
Mm.
then
They
took
did.
all the powers away.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's what's happening in countries all over. It's
Yeah.
happening in Turkey.
I
It's happening
yeah.
in the,
I
this is
personally
what people
don't
do.
mind at all if Extinction Rebellion creates ruckuses, and I agree with you.
Yeah,
It creates gets attention. For me personally, I think they're doing that. How can I add value? And I thought
that's
my hunger strike. I thought I can do something that sends a very powerful statement. And then the people who go, "Oh yeah, but you're just annoying people," they can't say that because I wasn't. The only person that was impacted was me. So I saw it. That's kind of what I felt like, and then that's where I think the other thing is we have to keep people positive, because if you get too despondent, you can give up. And so
I
that's
reckon
why
I
I
reckon there's
want to
two
say,
sides to that coin. Let let,
yeah,
let let's talk about that, because while everyone's feeling good and positive,
mm,
they don't take action.
they can't have cognitive dissonance. They've got to be
Yeah,
realistic, but
yeah,
we've also got to have active hope, And I
and
think,
and and
yeah,
and signing
yeah,
a petition or wearing a t-shirt
yeah,
at the moment does
mm,
nothing. I mean, Plibersek has shown that. So
yeah,
so so to achieve what we want for climate change and
mm,
for me,
yeah,
biodiversity is number one,
yeah,
because I think people will actually wake up to climate change.
mm,
I think people will, and I think we'll see radical
yeah.
action. But I
There's
think
more
some of
hope.
that radical action,
Yeah,
but I think some of the radical action that we'll take to pursue climate goals will actually be
yeah,
harmful for biodiversity. That's my
yeah.
concern is
I
that. uh, So I think we have to be really clear to get both at the
mm.
same time,
Yeah,
and not.
you've made that point a few times. I think they definitely cross over, but you can't just say I'm doing one and so the other doesn't matter.
Oh
But
no, no,
actually,
definitely.
yeah,
But that's
but
how I
just
rank them.
yeah,
I rank
but
them that way.
my favorite, but in terms of like non-violent direct action, I really believe in that. And my favorite one this week were these two grannies. One was 82 and one was 83, and one of them was like a reverend mother, like she was kind of, had a role in the church. It must have been one of the progressive churches because she was a woman and she was allowed to have a role. But anyway, they went in with a hammer and a chisel and they smashed the glass that protects the Magna Carta, which is their founding document in Britain, and then they
Yeah.
glued themselves to it. And I thought that was really powerful. But I think also one of the things that made it powerful, and this isn't with disrespect to the hippie people, but one of the things that made them powerful is that they were old 80-year-old grannies. And when we have a diversity of people all expressing concern for nature and for a safe climate, then it can't be written off as easily as just a fringe group of society. But I do agree with you. I think, unfortunately, for example, there isn't as much support, and governments and companies can get away with making, like, destroying habitat a lot more now than they can with emissions. And so we need to find a way to get people on board. And people think, oh, I'm a bit too sentimental because I get upset because the Gouldian finches are being driven to extinction. But for me, that's a tragedy. It just makes my heart feel so heavy and my eyes full of tears, because they're an exquisite creation of um, of evolution, and they're unique, and they're just exquisitely beautiful and more valuable than a housing estate. And so it's just devastating that we're not valuing what's really important.
It also goes to the question that I often ask people when this type of conversation begins, where
Mm.
they'll be passionately concerned about. Well, Japan is about to start hunting fin whales again,
Mm.
and and they'll say, but we should protect them, and we should protect the koalas. We should protect
Yeah.
koalas. Okay, what's different about protecting a koala and protecting the Gouldian finch or the
Mm.
swift parrot?
Yeah.
What 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 is the actual ethical difference
Yeah, or a
about
particular
protecting one and not the
grevillea.
other? Yeah,
Yeah, that's
exactly.
right. Yeah, or a
What is the
grevillea, or
ethical? Just
yeah,
explain to me the ethical difference between protecting
yeah. There's
tigers
none, is
or
there? There's no
or
difference. Yeah.
no, no.
Mm,
Now I can understand if someone wants to say, I think orangutans are funny and cute,
mm,
and I want them
mm.
to be around forever. And I've never heard of a Gordian finch, so I don't care.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah,
that's a perspective, but don't tell me you care about the environment, because that's not what you're
yeah,
doing.
yeah.
And yeah, yeah,
Mm.
yeah. Well, I'm very fired up about that idea for a trip. Now, I just want to
Now,
check.
what I want to know is, are you going to let me on for a third one so I can become an official friend of the
Well,
program
obviously, because when we've done the nuts and
when we
bolts
do our bike ride?
behind behind the scenes, we're going to have to
Mm.
drum up lots of support. I'm I,
Yeah,
I'm thinking this is one of the things where people can get involved if you do
yeah,
something
yeah,
like a bike ride. Now,
yeah.
you and
I,
I have got communication skills that a lot of people who undertake these challenges don't have. I've also got a box with all the Starlink gear in
mm.
my room,
Oh yeah,
so we can actually do
yeah.
something every
I
place we go
yeah.
to
I
actually, we don't have to
I
rely on Channel 7 Albury to turn up.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
I I really want to do it by myself, not because I don't want to
Oh,
do it with
oh,
you.
well, I
I
want to
know.
do it
The
with
the
you.
reason I want to do it by myself is to show, if I say I did it solo with just my credit card and my electric toothbrush, to demonstrate the simplicity. But I also want people to join me for parts of it. And that's where, for example, you could join me when I come across the border, and then we could go to is it called the Mallee Sunset National Park? And we could find the those gorgeous
The
little
Malleefowl.
Mallee emu wrens.
Yeah,
We could go
or
and
we could go
find
to
the
the
Mallee.
Malleefowl. Yeah.
Yeah, so we could go and we could do, and then we could actually
Now,
we could support the Mallee Fowl recovery program and do some. So I want people to join me on parts of the journey. So that's what
well,
I'd love to do with you.
I think that's a really good idea.
Yeah.
I'm
Mm.
I'm also thinking, what about Stan from Kangaroo Island, who's been driving his new EV all over
Oh
the place?
yeah.
He
Yeah,
could be the
yeah.
support vehicle
Mm.
for the
Yep.
leg from the border down to Sajuna or something.
Mm. But I
Uh,
really want. I think I don't want a support vehicle, because then it implies that renewable energy needs support. So I really want to show that I can do it with just
except
my
that
legs.
it's an EV. It's an EV.
Oh, I know. But do you know what I mean? I really like the
I do.
symbolism of me and getting on my bike in Perth, and even holding up and going, I've just got my electric toothbrush, my credit card, and I'm going to cycle across Australia on this e-bike to show that we can do this, Australia. We can electrify everything, and we can power it with renewables. And there might be a few hiccups, but that's how we're going to have a safe future. And then off I go, and a 56-year-old bloke can do it by himself, and then the community and people join me on the way. What do you think? You
Well,
like the idea that you want to join me for the whole thing?
I do like the idea.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah,
it's just interesting that you thought about that. I've been thinking about doing something that my idea
yeah,
was not so much going across the country, but
yeah.
it was to go to all of these biodiversity
Hot
hotspots,
spot. Yeah,
the key biodiversity areas,
yeah.
and talking to communities there, and then linking in with
Oh, I love that.
land care
And
groups and
that's
stuff.
where you could have the Starlink, and you could do because I remember I went to the Mallee Sunset National Park when I was the commissioner, but I didn't go there on an official trip. I took my family, and I remember we stayed at this motel in Oyen, and they have
Yeah.
the best deep fried lamb cutlets there. You wouldn't believe it; they're so good. But anyway, and then we our kids were about 4 and 6, and I said, now kids, tomorrow morning it's mummy and daddy's time, and we're going to look for this critically endangered bird. And so when we get to the national park, because the rangers gave me a GPS coordinates of where I might
Yeah.
find them. When we get there, we're all going to have to be really quiet for 2 or 3 hours, and bring your Kindles so you can read,
Yeah.
and I'll make a cup of tea and give you some wheat bix, and then you have to promise to be quiet because it's our time. Because I thought they'd get impatient after 5 minutes, and we were so lucky, Grant, because we got there and we pulled up, and then we got out of the car, and I was like pulled down the back, and I was making a cuppa out of the thermos, and then my daughter Tilly goes, "Daddy, Daddy, I think I can hear them." And then I said to her, "Oh, darling, that'd be superb fairy wrens." Like, because I could hear
Yeah,
some wrens.
you could hear the real, yeah, the
Yeah, and we
trilling
just
reel.
looked around, and then there was a flock of mallee emu wrens all around us,
Yeah, yeah.
chittering and jumping around, and like I nearly wet myself with delight to see those birds. Like, they're
And
amazing. I just love them. And
but
but
you
I
know
think
that
doing a story on that and taking and like uploading it live to Starlink could be a great way to get people engaged so they know what a mallee emu wren is.
well, I think people. Uh, I mean, this is one of the reasons why I sometimes think we're awarenessed out in a way. Um,
Mm,
um, but I, I, well, I want to get your thoughts on this. I think the time for awareness has kind of passed in a way, and I think that we now need to be promoting activism.
mm,
But then the question becomes, what kind of activism? And there's electoral activism, right?
mm.
There's working within the electoral system and
Yeah,
exercising influence and whatnot. But then there's direct action, and you've mentioned the term direct action.
yeah, yeah,
But that's when the differentiation needs to come about. So there's
yeah,
you know, I've got huge respect for people who do things like they run across the country for cancer and all that
yeah,
kind of
yeah,
stuff,
yeah.
and that kind of stuff always works because there's no downside to supporting it, right?
Mm, mm.
Any politician can put on a t-shirt, wear a ribbon, come out
Yeah,
and watch as someone comes across and say
they
I
love
support it.
that. The politicians
Yeah,
love all that. The
yeah,
world's biggest morning tea and the greatest
yeah,
shave, and
yeah.
they join in
And,
it all, don't they?
yeah,
Yeah, good,
and
good
see for
politics
me
for them.
but this is performative activism,
Yeah,
and this is why I'm torn about what is, and this is one of the questions I wanted to ask you. Like, what?
yeah,
uh, I mean, we don't live in a perfect world, right? And you personally know a lot of the people who are sitting in those offices
mm,
in all those um, public service officers dotted around the countries who are the people initiating policy alternatives
mm,
for government and whatnot. And I think, as we sort of detailed, a lot of them don't live in the same world as the people who are swinging seats in
mm.
elections. Someone who is bringing up a family on $80,000 a year, needing, I live in one of those
Yeah,
classic shithole suburbs, and there was a place went auction not last weekend, the weekend before, over 900,000 on
mm,
just a small
mm.
block. Now, how does just do the sums and work out if a family has a joint income of around $90,000 and their rent is something like, I don't even know what it is around here, but I think it's something
Yeah,
insane like $400 or $500 a week, maybe more.
yeah, at least.
How,
Yeah, yeah.
so if you're earning 90,000 a year and you have to get a 20,000
Mm,
deposit on a property that by the
yeah.
time you save for it will be $1 million, you need to
Mm,
save $100,000 plus exist.
mm.
It's just gone. So people
Yeah,
earning 150, 200, 300,000, they don't live in that world. So how do we get from from the awareness point of view, and I think that battle's been won. As you
Mm.
said, the survey said action on climate is the number one issue for
Yeah,
people who are
yeah,
potential Labor voters or potential voters.
yeah.
Okay,
And that was in the poorest area too. It
yeah,
wasn't in
uh,
the like the rich sort of,
uh,
or sort of,
no, no, no,
hipster
no, no.
green voting area. Yeah,
No,
it was
everyone
in the
agrees.
tradie suburbs. Yeah. Mm.
Everyone agrees. But what
Mm.
happens is there are amazing amounts of resources that
Yeah,
are employed to convince people
yeah,
that the shit job that the government is doing is actually a
yeah.
good one.
Oh
So
yeah, like all
we'll be
those tweets.
bombarded with that.
Yeah, all the tweets we
So
were talking about from Tanya Plibersek about,
yeah.
or the
Oh,
treasurer. Like,
and Jim
we could go
Chalmers.
on about it.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, all day.
We all know the problem. So
Yeah.
my question to you, as someone who
Mm,
has sort of lived inside that world, but
mm,
comes from a different world and is now looking to do something that is proactive, that we actually
mm,
can paint a. I mean, I'm tired of painting a positive picture. I want to actually see positive action, real action. So
mm.
how uh, if you're just Joe or Josephine average, right, what can you take it upon yourself to do that
Mm.
you think will actually have an influence on on
Yeah,
policy,
I
on
reckon that's
outcomes?
a perfect question for, like, to close it off. Our discussion. I don't know how long we've been going for, but
You know,
my
that's about the
yeah.
end of what I had for
Yeah.
you.
And
So
because my answer to that question, which is a really interesting, because like 3 or 4 years ago, I wouldn't have thought of it, but it's basically what I'm really committed to now. Is my answer would be, find out what groups are working in your community for alternatives to break this two-party monopoly, duopoly system. That, they call them the voices
mm,
of Bean and the voices of Farah. Find out what community-based organisations are looking for. And right at the moment, there's actually multiple electorates where community groups are getting together to try and find a candidate. And some of the people that are listening might be the right candidate, because what we need is, we need people who are connected, who aren't politicians, who aren't captured by their parties, and who are connected to and a part of their community. And then find those people, and then develop these campaigns and get together to work to get them to elected, so we can take back Parliament House. And take the Labor and Liberal think they own that building, and they take it in turns to run Australia, but actually Australians own that building. And we need more independent, credible independence in the parliament. And I think getting informed about that, and then helping getting them elected, and like whatever you do, big or small, together, all of that adds up. That'd be my answer.
we need to take advantage of one of the benefits of the constitutional monarchy and parliamentary system that we have in Australia too, which is the fact that we have uh, proportional representation in one
Yeah,
house, and
yeah.
that we have preferential voting
Mm, totally.
in the other,
Yeah,
which means that we are far more likely to have a responsive
yeah.
parliament
We we need to
than in many other
reclaim
systems.
our democracy,
Yeah,
and we can do it
it's
because we are lucky, because we've got that, like you said, we've got the system where you actually might get in on second
or third
preferential voting
preferences.
system.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, or third preferences. And so I think David Pocock got in on first preferences because he just
yeah,
annihilated Zed Sezelja. But a lot of the Teals or independents get in on second preferences, and then, or even third. And I remember when they had those governments, and there was that guy, he was from Victoria, and his name was Ricky. and like he got into the Senate,
Oh,
and I think
Ricky Gallagher, who was the
yeah, and he only had
uh,
about 1% of the vote or something.
yeah. Well,
But
I
because
think it was
everyone else was
even
so
less.
appalling, they
Yeah,
just kept going. No one could get a majority because everyone was
yeah,
so dodgy.
yeah,
And then it finally
yeah,
got down to him, and he got the most votes because all of the rest of them were so useless.
yeah. Well,
And then he was like,
I think it was
"Goodness,
Ricky Gallagher. If I'm wrong,
yeah."
let me know.
He
I'm
was
pretty sure
he
that
was
was
from
his
a
name.
four-wheel drive party.
Yeah,
Like
yeah, yeah.
he wanted to
That's
promote
what he was. He
four-wheel
was a
drive.
recreational 4-wheel drive guy, and it was
Yeah,
sort of a
yeah.
precursor
Mm.
to the shooters and fishers getting really organised in
Yeah, like
Victoria.
I think we
Uh,
should have another discussion on the Teals, but and the independents, but also look at Jackie Lambie. If she's done a really good job. Like she's not perfect on everything, like all of them, and she supports logging, which makes me cross. But she's the only politician I know who said, I made a mistake. She used to be really anti-Muslim, and then she realised that. And she just said, look, I'm sorry, I was wrong on that. I made a mistake. You never, ever hear that from Labor, Liberal, or the Greens, ever, that they've made a mistake, do you?
yeah. I think she's still anti-greeny, isn't she? Like she's
She probably,
vehemently
I think she's anti-greeny, but
anti-greeny.
she's very
Uh,
good on like welfare,
yeah.
mental health, and all of those issues. And she'll
Well,
probably come around on climate and green and go, sorry, I made a mistake on that too. Because she did on
well, I don't know. I mean,
like, who knows?
I appreciate some of the things she's done,
Yeah,
but she did a massive
yeah,
about
yeah.
face about
But she
public
is,
urban open space in Hobart. She did a massive
yeah, but she's
about
a
face
hell of a
there.
lot. She's a hell of a lot better than the dodgy people that were in there
Oh
before.
hell yeah,
And
hell
then,
yeah.
yeah, but also she didn't come. She came through the Clive Palmer party. But these new voices groups, it's the community who decides, not who the candidate is, not Clive Palmer or not the Labor Party or the Liberals or the Greens. It's the community who decides. And
Oh,
so that's,
that reminds
I
me.
think that's the
Have you
thing we
got your
need to do.
tickets? Have you bought your tickets to the Australian Freedom Conference that Tucker
No, I
Carlson and
haven't. I saw that.
Tucker
I saw
Carlson
that
and
on.
Clive Palmer are speaking at? That would be amazing.
It will.
I mean,
Hey, th-
yeah,
thank you so much for having me on the show, and thanks for giving me the feedback on my e-bike for Australia initiative. That's the first time I've mentioned it publicly, what I've been thinking, but I think I'm pretty committed to doing it. I think I'll do it from late July, and then it'll
well,
take me about 8 weeks.
when you've done your planning and you know where you're
Yeah,
going and you've got
righto.
dates set, come
Yeah.
back on and we can
All
talk
right,
about
we'll do
that.
that. We could do
So
one
we can,
halfway through. Like we could do one from
yeah,
the bird observatory down. There's a bird
at
observatory
Glue Pot,
on. Yeah, is it, yeah, Glue
yeah,
Pot Bird
at Glue
Observatory
Pot.
or something
So
like that.
it it would be good to do one before you go so we can let people
Yeah,
know who might want to
good
meet up
idea.
with you along the way
Yeah, yeah.
where you are
All right,
planning to go to give an idea
all
about
right.
the itinerary
Once I
and
lock it
then
all
yeah
in and then
yeah
do my planning, I'll let you
yeah
know. And
yeah and then
if you
I
can have me
and
back on the show, I'll love it. And then I'll be
and then
official friend of the show.
yeah and then I might have to produce a t-shirt for you and then we'll
Yeah.
see whether I can tell me what the dates are. I've got a
Yeah,
uh,
and
uh,
I think we should. I think you should definitely meet me, and we should ride like from say, well, what is it like Pinaroo or Lameroo or somewhere where the border is, and through that sort of northwestern corner of Victoria, and then
well
go to Oyen, and then go
I
up and find the Mallee Imurans.
Well, I need an excuse to get out to Stan and Kangaroo Island, and then maybe even, if you're that far, you may as well
Yeah,
go to Ceduna or Port Lincoln or something. So depending on
yeah,
which
because I'll
way
be going
you
through.
go,
I'll go through Ceduna and Port Lincoln for sure.
yeah. Well,
I'll start
so
in
I'd probably
Perth and I'll go down
so
to Albany and then across to Esperance and then up to Norseman and then across the Nullarbor to Ceduna and then I'll go down. Is it called the Eyre Peninsula? That one
yeah,
down
yeah, yeah,
down to
yeah.
Port
So you
Lincoln and then up
go
past
down that,
Whyalla,
yeah.
Port Augusta. I'll stop in at that lovely little
You have to go to Kimber
uh,
because it's got the
pardon?
great name. You have to go to Kimber because it's
Yeah,
got such a good name.
yep. Timber, and then I'll duck into Adelaide because I've got a few aunties there. I can that's where I might be able to have a massage and a recovery day or
and
something.
and that's where you need to make the decision about, do you go there, do you go down to like somewhere like Mount Gambier, or do you then go up to Naracoorte and
I think I'd
Pinaroo?
probably head up towards Mildura then,
Yeah, yeah,
and
okay.
then
So
and
you're
then from
going up
Mildura,
Naracoorte,
yeah, and
and
then
then
across the Hay Plain, and then to Griffith,
oh, well,
and
but
then
if
maybe
you go that way, you
yeah.
miss the Murray Sunset and Hattah
Oh,
country.
do I? Yeah. Oh, the
Yeah.
Hattah. That's where the emu wrens are. Isn't that? Aren't
No,
they
no,
near
no, no.
Oyen?
Emu wrens are in the Sunset Country,
Okay. Yeah. Well,
and then
what's at Hattah?
well, Hattah, depending on if it's in flood or not,
Yeah.
you could see any of the sort of
Oh,
arid birds,
yeah. All
and
right.
you might see any of the sort of eruption birds as well. So
Yeah. I probably
yeah,
should go there as well.
yeah,
Um.
uh,
All right. I'm gonna have to
good
go
country.
home
Yeah,
now.
yeah, yeah.
'Cause
Cool. Well,
I'm at the beautiful National Gallery of Australia Gardens.
now was
We've got a really nice native garden here, and I've
is
got to get on my
is
treadly and get home.
now, do we have the Whitlam government to thank for the National Gallery? I
We
think we
probably
do, don't
do because the National Gallery is one of those kind of 1970s brutalist buildings, like the High
we? Yeah,
Court.
along with the High
So
Court. Yeah.
yeah, it
So
probably is Gough Whitlam.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, my auntie actually worked for Gough Whitlam.
Oh,
She was
good on
like
her.
his one of his secretaries or something. Yeah.
Oh, good on
Mm.
her. Well, you've got
All right.
so. How did you end up working for Mel Bruff then, with that good family history?
Oh, I never worked for Malbrough. There's a lot of misinformation out there about
Oh
me on the
well,
internet. Yeah,
so
I, the only politicians that I officially worked for, believe it or not, is Greg Hunt, and that was because I was lent to him. I worked
yeah,
with Greg Combay and Mark Dreyfus, both of whom I really liked
yeah,
on
Combay's
climate
a winner.
change.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really miss Greg Combay, and then like I accompanied Julia Gillard to international meetings like in Rio and stuff. And then there was a change of government, and the department needed someone to lend to the new government to help them
Oh, so
set up.
you were in the transition crew.
Yeah, and so I was sent
Okay.
up
Well, there
because
we go.
I met Greg Hunt out at Uluru when I was like working in the non-government sector, and I quite liked him, and like I don't, I didn't agree with what they were doing on climate change, but someone had to be the ambassador to help set things up, and he was actually a good boss and a nice man. So I worked for him for a bit, but he's the only politician I've worked for. I met Mal Brough once or twice. I was actually a senior public servant in the FACSIA. It was called Families, Community
Yeah,
Housing,
yeah.
Indigenous Affairs, and he was the minister. But I never worked for him. Yeah, but there's a lot
Well,
of mis.
well, there we
You
go.
read,
We've cleared something
yeah.
up. I
If you read stuff, some of the stuff on the internet, you could go down a rabbit hole and you could end up believing that I've driven tanks through Indigenous communities. Like if you
oh,
went down the wrong rabbit hole.
but something I'd also like to point out for people, that
Yeah.
when you are in things like the NGO sector, and you are building a career, and you're in the public service or whatever,
Mm.
sometimes you take a job because it's a job that might lead you to somewhere else, which is on your
Yeah. Yeah.
on your plan. But if you end up somewhere and you drink the Kool-Aid, and you
Mm.
put on the armbands and all that, and the
Yeah.
rest of it, well then you can't be forgiven. But
Oh
there we go.
no. Like
We've cleared up a misconception.
exactly. Like
So
on June, I just finished watching June 2, the second of the June movies with my kids. And they have Kool-Aid. They call it the water of life, and they get it from
yeah.
those sand things, and it's this blue color, and I'm like, "Oh, she's already drunk the Kool-Aid and he hasn't drunk it yet." And but yeah, I think I never drank the Kool-Aid, or I might have had a sip a few times, but I never really liked it. But I definitely haven't had any Kool-Aid for a long time. But the bloke who thought I was mentally deranged because I care about climate change, he's had too much Kool-Aid.
Well, there's a lesson for everyone, boys and girls, is that
Yeah,
just because you read it somewhere doesn't make it true. Always find a
yeah,
source document, or or seek a quote. So
yeah.
there we are. We've
Hey,
done
thanks
that.
for having me on the show again,
Thanks for coming
and
on. It
thank
was
you for
great.
what you do. I never feel like we talk enough about birds, but that's all right.
Well, I have to say, Greg, uh, it it's getting harder for me to
Mm,
feel comfortable just talking about birds because then I think that we slip just into the comfort zone of everything will
yeah,
be all right, everything will be
yeah.
fine, and
I
it
think
won't.
you're right.
It won't.
Yep,
So
yep.
I,
I think I
increasingly
think next
issues.
time. I think that's a good point. I think next time maybe we should carve out 15 minutes for bird talk.
Well,
Just
actually, before next time, let's go and do a couple of
yeah,
eBirds and then
yeah.
compare them
All right. Good idea.
because
Because I used to have a T-shirt called Bird Nerd. I'll find a copy of it. My wife and kids had it
I'm in the
made up
middle of
for me.
producing some.
Yeah.
I'm in the middle of producing a whole
So
range. I'm just a
everyone
bit
who I know
behind.
calls me a bird nerd,
Yeah,
and I love talking about birds, and I like being with my people who like talking about birds, and my bird people are few and far between.
bird people are good people. I've got to
They
say,
are good people.
if these numbers on Twitter are right, we have smashed it out of the park today,
Have
Gregory.
we? Great.
Yeah.
I tried to
Then
find the promo that you sent so I could forward it, but what I'll do is I'll send it after because you save it onto a computer or something, and then I'll be able to forward it, and people can listen to the whole thing, can't they?
yeah, and so it'll be out. It'll be residing on Facebook,
Yeah,
LinkedIn, YouTube, Twitch, Twitter, and Instagram, and it will also go out on the podcast feed in a little while.
fantastic.
Also on YouTube Music as well, so
Oh,
it's out
great.
everywhere.
Good. Yeah,
But
we've got.
Twitter people don't interact. That's the thing. They don't
Yeah,
interact live, though they will later.
I
They'll
I
slag us
like.
off in the comments.
I'm still calling it Twitter because I'm waiting until like it gets
So
wrecked and
yeah,
someone
and
buys it
someone takes it
off
over. Yeah.
Elon Musk, and then it's rebranded as Twitter. I can't call it X. I still call it
Yeah.
Twitter.
I'm still waiting for evidence that these 89 people that are currently viewing, which is the most that I've
Yeah.
ever had,
Oh,
that they're actually people. But apparently there are 89 people watching
wow.
live now on
Well,
X.
hopefully
So
they might be all the climate bots because I get a lot of climate bots. Anything I put out, I get dozens of like replies that are kind of aggressive. They're often a bit misogynistic.
yeah, oh yeah,
And
yeah, yeah.
they're climate change denying, but it might be all the Russian climate bots, or it might be just some really avid conservation and climate activist people like us.
Yeah,
Hopefully, it's the latter.
well, we'll find out in
Yeah.
the feedback that we
All
get
right.
over time. So that'll be interesting. All
Okay.
right. Well, thanks for coming on. It's been a long time in the making,
It has.
um,
It's
and
it's always a pleasure.
I look forward to getting an update on where you're at
Good.
with the trek across the country, and we'll see
Great.
how we can collaborate. That'll be
Thanks,
fantastic.
Grant. All right.
Cool bananas.
Okay. See
Okay.
ya.
Thanks, Gregory. Okay, folks. We'll just keep going for just a minute or two. Gregory, if you need to go, yep, he's gone. Cool. I we were talking about the Swift parrot. I've just pulled up um, the International Union of Conservation Networks. Critically endangered, last assessed on the 7th of August 2018. So we're getting up to 6 years since it was last assessed. In 2015, it was upgraded to critically endangered. And the it's been seen or been recorded in about 100 100 locations, Species breeds in Tasmania, mostly along the southeastern coast, St Helens to Southport, with a small breeding population in the north near Deloraine. Um, so that's pretty similar to the kind of country that the 40 spotted pardalote is in. Um, just saying, in 1987 to 88, the breeding population was estimated at 5,000 birds, including 1,320 breeding pairs. In 1995-96, 940 breeding pairs. Annual surveys across the non-breeding range fluctuate depending on the distribution of the birds across the landscape and flock sizes. In 2010, mainland surveys recorded 2,158 birds, including immatures, the highest count for many years. Chris Zaros and Dean Ingerson, that was in 2010. Garnet, 2011, estimate that the population probably contains around 2,000 individuals and is declining. However, a population viability analysis model predicted that the population will decline by an average of 87% over 3 generations. That's 12 to 18 years. So we're over that. So if we said there were 2,000 mature individuals, but that 87% of it would decline over 12 to 18 years, well, then we would say, what's that? 10% is 200. 200. So, yeah, we can safely assume that there's between 600 and maybe let's say 500, 400 mature individuals. Yeah. But it hasn't had another assessment since 2018. Yeah, all right. Geez. There we are. Hello, Twitch, by the way. Nice to see you here. Oh, sorry, I should have brought that up, shouldn't I? That was what I was looking at here. All the notes on the Swift Parrot from the IUCN redlist.org, which is one of the websites I go to more than any other. Very, very, very interesting. Well, that was interesting, wasn't it, talking to Gregory? Yeah. That'll be interesting, him getting across the country. Oh, there we are. And I can tell you that Instagram is very... Instagram's still live. Is that right? Well, that's good. Instagram's now running for longer than an hour. Oh, I'm happy with that. Oh, that's great. Well done, Instagram. Well done, Instagram. All right, folks, that's about where I'm going to leave you. Thanks for Rewild Perth too, joining on the Instagram. That was nice to see you. I think actually, let me do something very unprofessional. I got a email while we were talking. Okay, that tells me that on Wednesday I will be speaking with. Here's the email to prove it. That we're now booked in. Where are we? Here. With Claire Hawkins about Where We're Wedgie, the wedge-tailed eagle surveys in Tasmania. So I cannot remember. Let me just check. Midday Wednesday, Australian Eastern Standard Time. Be speaking with Claire, and 9 a.m. on Thursday, and Gota, and Goth, as most people will pronounce her name, and we'll be talking about brush turkeys. Anne's got a book out about brush turkeys called Amazing Annoying Birds. We're going to be talking about that. So that will keep us busy. Wednesday, Claire Hawkins talking Where We're Wedgie. The first surveys for this year's Where We're Wedgie happened on the weekend just gone, and there are more surveys on the weekend coming up. But it's been a couple of years since Claire's been on the show talking about Where We're Wedgie. So we'll talk about some of the population trends, and they're also counting big white birds as well in Tasmania in the surveys. And you can be a hero even if you get a 0. We're going to talk about all those things. Surveying populations, citizen science, all the things we like to talk about. That will be Fabbo and 9 a.m. 9 a.m. on Thursday, talking brush turkeys with Anne Gota. Thanks, folks. Oh, I better get back here if I want to stop. Hopefully we get some comments and some feedback next time. But I've enjoyed speaking to you all again today. Remember, it is an emergency. Try and do something to influence somebody about biodiversity retention and climate change. Even if it's chasing down some fresh information and sharing people's live streams or social media streams, or trying to build a community with those people that are out there raising awareness. God, I hate to talk about it, but if those of us who are raising awareness can actually start to form communities and alliances and exert influence, that's when we might get some better policy outcomes, because we need it. I'm Grant. I'm a bird nerd. This has been the Bird Emergency. I thank you for joining me today. And thanks, Gregory Andrews, for becoming an almost friend of the show. See ya.